Hi, everybody. I'm Amelia Rauser. I'm a professor of art history at Franklin and Marshall College.
And hi, I'm Laura Engel. I'm a professor of theater and literature at Duquesne University.
And we would like to introduce you to our exhibition, Artful Nature, which is currently installed at the Lewis Walpole Library, but which nobody can see right now because of the coronavirus shutdown.
This is our fantabulous curator of collections at the Lewis Walpole Library, Cindy Roman, who is standing at the entrance to our exhibition. So hopefully you will join us for a tour.
The show brings into dialogue with one another these two concepts of artfulness and naturalism. At a time in the late 18th century when many art forms, including fashion and the theater, were striving for a greater sense of naturalism and authenticity in the way that they projected on stage or on women's bodies, but also that these two art forms in particular, fashion and theater, were long-standing tropes of artifice. So we're interested in that paradox and the productive spaces it created for women in particular. This object is a featured object in our show. It's a dress that is loaned from RISD. It's a good example of a typical early 1790s neoclassical dress with a high waist and the white muslin textile. Dresses like this construed women as sculptures come to life, as living statues. And in so doing, women were both the sculptor and the artwork. They were objectified as sculptures, but they were also subjectified through the aesthetic process of sculpting themselves. And in this way, they were playing the roles of both Pygmalion and Galatea.
And we can see examples of fashion offstage being fashionable on stage in this wonderful portrait by Robert Thew of Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale. And in this image, we have Hermione miraculously coming to life as a living sculpture in Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale. And this was a role that was popularized by the very famous actress Sarah Siddons. You can also see an example of idealized and very non-realistic neoclassical dress on stage and outside in this print of Shakespeare's Cymbeline. Imogen wears a very flowing neoclassical gown that is falling off of her shoulders, emphasizing the erotic and sexualized presence of the 18th century actress.
Women who were fashionable were often lampooned, of course. Fashion was a synonym for deceptiveness and artfulness in the sense of cunning. And you can see that in this contrast between a woman who is making herself up at a mirror on her dressing table as artful, and nature, the beautiful country lass on the left. Older women were also subject to lampoons, especially for dressing too young, and neoclassical dress did favor a very young silhouette. But women of all types could be lampooned, and it was a very fine line to walk. So here we have a contrast between a good mother and a bad mother, both of whom are wearing neoclassical dress, but the good mother is wearing a pretty modest version of it and is using it as a way to nurture her children at home by the fireside in her natural role as a mother, whereas the fashionable mother on the left is taking neoclassical fashion to the extreme. She's wearing a more embellished, bejeweled version and heading out to the masquerade ball while her children are being neglected and beaten in the background.
This is just a picture of all of us in the gallery. We had some wonderful programming around the opening of the show in February. You can see Joseph Roach here. He gave a fantastic lecture in honor of the show. This is Emma Hamilton, who made a living being a neoclassical sculptor come to life in her performative attitudes, which dazzled audiences in Naples. So Emma Hamilton, too, was also the author of her own work and the subject of her work. Female artists were often criticized and lampooned for being a part of the professional artistic sphere. And this is the Demarian Apollo featuring Anne Damer sculpting in a kind of lascivious and sexualized pose.
We use this print, which is called The Art of Fainting in Company, as the cover of our little exhibition catalog, because it really encapsulates many of the ideas in the show. The idea that a woman who is fainting is very in touch with her emotions and her feelings. She has a high degree of sensitivity and sensibility, and that means she is natural, that she is authentic, she is authentically feeling. And yet the artfulness of fainting in company is putting yourself in a particularly lovely pose, wearing a beautiful outfit, being quite sure how you're being viewed, and your behaviors being constructed by society.
It also brings together a lot of echoes of the many threads in our exhibition: literary, theatrical, artistic, and it certainly mirrors how many of us are feeling at the present moment.
Yes, so if you feel like fainting, you're in good company, but we're very glad you joined us for this short little tour. I believe that more photos will be available soon in an online tour of the exhibition on the Lewis Walpole website.
Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.